Right, good evening everyone, and welcome to class number 9. It's 9, yeah. Class number 9 of your CCNA course at CFSI. So this is the class, well, this would be the class for the 31st of March. I hope you all enjoyed your holiday, and I hope the state of emergency and the lockdown is going well for you all. I hope you all bought enough groceries and everything you need. Well, of course, those places staying open, but that's not stopping people from going and buying that sort of stuff and hoarding or rushing, set of madness. But anyway, we continue just as we were doing for the last few weeks. Our classes are online, and we are committed to keeping you all safe and making sure that after all of this, you all are just as bright and educated in the Cisco world as you would have been if you were in class. So as long as you keep up with these videos, of course, and follow the textbook or the CBT Nuggets videos, and of course right now, be practicing your subnetting and watching over the videos if you're unsure about any of the other topics. As long as you do all of those things, you'll be just up and ready to hit the exams as soon as the exam centers reopen, and as soon as you finish the course, of course. So today, today we'll be doing presentation 5, the first half of presentation 5, and then of course after I'm leaving you all to do lab number 8. So lab number 8 is configuring VLANs and access ports and trunk ports. So in this class we'll be starting the concepts of switching, and I believe in the second half of presentation 5 here. So we won't actually start VLANs in this class, but the labs are usually self-contained. So once you read the instructions and you could follow along, you should be able to complete the lab anyway. So don't worry about it matching up too much. Just read the instructions and ask me if you have any questions. But in this class, we will be going up till here. So we'll be finishing the whole of the giant section that was section 1 today, finally. So as I keep saying, we took our time, and I hope that when you all read through these topics now, you'll understand, you'll have a good idea of all of these things, and you'll appreciate why we and why Cisco spent so much time expanding on these base concepts. These things are very important, and they build on the other things, right? So if you don't understand what a layer 3, what a layer 2 and a layer 3 switch is, you won't understand this class, and you won't understand what switching concepts are, and how they differ from routing concepts, just as an example. So of course, once you finish this section today, from the next class we'll be going on to the more advanced sections, which will just be building on our strong foundation now. We'll be building on VLANs and interswitch connectivity and the layer 2 protocols and Ether channel and all of these nice concepts and all of these nice protocols, once we understand the foundational stuff here. Okay, so let's begin here. One moment. Oh yeah, by the way, I also wanted to mention, I noticed in the past week or so, a few more students have begun contacting me and asking me questions about their labs and about certain concepts that they might not have been too clear on, and that's great. I'm glad to see that you all are taking interest and you all are actually watching these videos. And of course, I encourage you, keep contacting me. Keep watching over the videos if you need to, reading over the topics, go into other places. I did see a few students mention some other YouTubers and some other videos they found. I always encourage that. Go to other lecturers and other sources online, and see if you understand their concepts better, or see if seeing a topic approach from a different angle clears up the way that I was presenting it. So yeah, just wanted to mention that. It's great to see the interest. I want you all to be really comfortable with this material going out of your CCNA course. Okay, so let's begin. Right, so we'll spend a good bit of this class just recapping a lot of the stuff that we covered in the last class, because of course, as I just mentioned, this stuff is just fundamental, and we need to understand this stuff going into the other sections. I don't want you all to become lost because you just kind of glimpse over the first 2 or 3 videos and you just forget it going into the other classes, because you'll be very lost. So that's why I spend so much time just recapping and making sure it's cemented in your head. But of course, we'll also be diving into new material. So we'll be doing the last few sections in section 1 in this class, and on Thursday we'll be starting off section 2, which is the configuration of VLANs and interswitch connectivity and all of those things. And I know I heard a good few people mention VLAN, so I know you all see and you all know how important these things are and how widespread they're used in our networks. Right, so first a brief recap of last class. Well, the last few classes really. I think it's the last 2 or 3 classes we'll go through. So last class, I don't think it was last class, I think it was the class before that. But in the last few weeks, sometime we discussed the need for private IPv4 addresses. Can you remember why an organization would need to utilize these private IPv4 addresses? So just in case you don't remember, these private addresses are plentiful and free. So no permission is needed to use them. So anybody, even you, you can go out and use these private IPv4 addresses, and it's perfectly legal and perfectly fine for you to use the same private addresses that everyone else is using in your own lab network or your own home network, and you won't conflict with anything else that's on the internet. So just for instance, if you set up your own lab network and you connect that in for everyone in your house, you're not going to conflict with anything else on the internet, because these private addresses are made to be used like that. They need to be used by individuals and by organizations. So hopefully you could remember some of the private IPv4 blocks, because I always stressed on this. So it's the 10.0.0.0/8 block, the 192.0.0/16 block, and the 172.16.0.0/12 block. So this block, a little weird. The other two kind of split along these octets perfectly. So the /8 means that we have the 8 bits in this octet set, and these others are not. So all these private addresses are going to start with 10. So it's going to be 10 dot something all the time. Same thing with the 192 block. 192.168 will remain there because it's a /16, and because these ones are set in these first 2 octets, and in the last 2 octets we'll set this to whatever we want. So it's easy to identify these addresses and say that 10 dot anything is a private IP, 192.168 dot anything is a private IP, but the /16 is kind of split here. So this actually goes from 172.16 to 172.31.255.255 if I remember correctly. So this one is a bit weird. You can't just say if it starts with 192.16, or if it starts with 172.16, or if it starts with 172, it's definitely a private IP. It's not. But these are the private blocks we assigned, and these are what we can use. So when you see these used in organizations, you'll know why you see these used so often and why these are so special. So however, utilizing private IPv4 addresses also led to several problems in enterprises. Can you remember some of these problems? So I hope you all can. The private IP addresses are not routable on the public internet. So you can't take a 10 address. If you have 10.0.0.1 on your laptop, you can't access any sites on the internet with that address. So other processes, which I mentioned, like NAT, so network address translation, which we'll discuss a little later on. These other processes need to be employed before machines addressed with private addresses can communicate with hosts across the internet. But of course, this whole NAT thing, it broke a lot of fundamental internet principles, and as you'll see when we start it gets a bit complicated because it wasn't meant to be, IPv4 wasn't meant to be stretched as far as we are stretching it nowadays. So what was the ultimate solution to all of these problems? Well, IPv6. So for example, 2803, 1500, 1201, and this long string here, which I think is my prefix. So each of these digits is a hexadecimal number. As you can see, we have a E here, We have a B here, two B's, the next E. So these aren't our normal decimal numbers. These are hexadecimal numbers. Can you remember how many bits every IPv6 address has? So hopefully you can. So IPv4 addresses are 32 bits long, which you have to remember for subnetting, because a lot of the math involved in subnetting is based on that 32 bits length. And for IPv6 now, you need to remember that every IPv6 address has 128 bits. And this is of course important in when we compress the address and when we need to re-expand them. We use this principle of 128 bits to re-expand and to fill in the extra zeros that we could have taken out. So can you remember how to perform IPv6 address compression and re-expansion? So just as a quick practice, pause the video now and try to compress this address. So I have the answer here. Yeah, very compressed. So hopefully you know how to get from here to here, and if I give you this address, you know how to get from here back to here, because this was a popular CCNA question in the last version. Just a quick compression and a quick expansion. They'll give you this and they'll ask you what's the most compressed address you could form out of this, ABCD. One mark quickly. So practice this and make sure you can do it fairly quickly. Now remember what the first part of an IPv6 address is called. It's not called a subnet mask as in IPv4. It's called the prefix, or the prefix length if you given the number of bits. So for end hosts, do you remember what the size of the prefix usually is? It's always, well, most of the time is 64 bits. So this was the example I gave. So between routers, as in just a point-to-point link with only two things connected on it, there is an RFC to use a /127 address there, just to save space. But in the vast majority of IPv6 networks that you'll see out there, they recommend just use a /64. Whether you have one laptop on the network or 4 laptops, or hundreds of laptops and desktops, just use a /64. You have space to grow in the network, and a lot of protocols are built around that 64-bit prefix. They expect 64 bits. Well, they expect to receive 64 bits, and they expect to make their own 64 bits trailer or suffix using that 64-bit prefix that they receive. So that's why you'll usually see /64 prefixes being handed out. Now, do you remember some of the viable methods for configuring IPv6 addresses? So hopefully you do. You remember SLAC, which is stateless address auto-configuration, or stateful DHCPv6. Most of the implementations I've seen just use SLAC. So they just hand out IPv6 prefixes on the network, and most Windows and Linux and Mac hosts know how to auto-configure themselves. So that's the AC part here. They know how to use SLAC and how to form their full 128-bit address using that 64-bit prefix. Usually for stateful DHCP, if you need like advanced parameters, if you need to send out a time server or an NTP host or something, you'll use stateful DHCP to assign these extra options, because SLAC is a bit limited in how many extra options you could assign. So that's really where you'll see stateful DHCP. Most of the networks will use SLAC. Now, how about the types of IPv6 addresses? So hopefully you will remember these big classes. So we had multicast, anycast, and unicast addresses. And then within unicast addresses, we had global unicast addresses, unique local addresses, and link local addresses. And of course, which type of addresses were removed from IPv4? Broadcast. So we had broadcast addresses in IPv4, we don't have it in IPv6. It was removed and replaced by directed multicast. And of course, I mentioned you want to learn the prefixes, or the ranges, I should say, for each of these. So global unicast was 2000:/3. I always forget the range for global unique local. Link local is FE80 something. So memorize those starting bits, because we had a lot of those questions in the last version of CCNA as well. Cisco will give you a random address, or they might just give you the range and say, what's the range for global unicast, ABCD. I remember some of those questions coming up, so memorize those ranges. Right, now do you remember how to verify IP address parameters on different host machines or different OSs or different types of host machines? So on Windows machines, you type ipconfig/all. You could take ipconfig by itself. The /all just gives you a bunch more parameters and a bunch more data, basically. On Linux and Mac machines, you could do a ifconfig or an IP address show on the newer machines. So of course, this is an example that I ran on my work laptop, and of course you could if I gave you this IPv4 address, you could tell that this is a private IPv4 address because it's 172.22. And remember I said the range of private addresses was 172.16 to 172.31, so immediately you could tell that this is a private IPv4 address. So outside on the internet you can't reach this, and now you understand why. Private IP addresses can't get out to the internet, not by themselves. And you could tell, my DNS server, my default gateway, which is how I get out of my network. You could tell this is an IPv6 address, and you could tell what type of IPv6 address it is based on the starting bits here. You could tell this is a MAC address, and you can see DHCP is enabled and all these things. So you can see this is a very useful, it gives us very useful data. So that's on Windows. This is on Linux. So you can see we did a ifconfig, and we get all of the same type of information, but it is less. We missed in the DNS servers and whether DHCP is used or not. All of those nice bits of juicy info we don't have here, but there are other tools to get those bits of info. And then of course on Macs, we do the same ifconfig, right? So you see ifconfig here. And we get a bunch of the same info. So you can see the IPv6 address, their private IP address. It gives us the broadcast address. Right, so it gives us the network mask in a hex form, which is kind of irregular. I've never seen Cisco ask about it in a hex form, so don't worry about that. And then, well, at least they give us the prefix length in a standard decimal. And yeah, you can see the commands are fairly identical across all the host machines. Then we went on to describe the basics of wireless communications. So do you remember the types of signals that make wireless communications possible? So RF or EM signals. We described how RF signals are separated into bands in the frequency domain, and how we want to plan our AP placement to prevent overlap and interference. So we basically said we transmit signals using these RF signals in free space or in the air, and each signal has a particular frequency, and each of those frequencies, well, the whole frequency domain or the whole space of usable frequencies in the RF space is separated into a bunch of smaller bands, with a bunch of smaller sections that we call bands. And in networking, we want to plan our access point placement, and our access point design and our Wi-Fi design to prevent overlap and to prevent interference. So we don't want to put two access points right next to each other and have them transmitting and receiving on the same frequency bands, because then they produce a lot of interference. So these are the non-overlapping channels. So it means these are the channels that we can use on our Wi-Fi networks. So there are most equipment is programmed for 11 channels, but those channels overlap. So channel 2 is theoretically a band that you could use, but channel 2 is placed somewhere here, right next to channel 1. So typically you'll see good Wi-Fi designers saying don't use channel 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, just use 1, 6 and 11. And in certain regions, I think Japan is mainly the region that uses this. You have a channel 14 here, which kinda, you can see they touch in there, so there's no guard band between them, which is what this kind of space here is called. There is no guard band between them, but theoretically you could use channel 14. But it is very region specific, which is why most designers would just stick with 1, 6 and 11. So you can see here again 1, 6 and 11, and we still have that guard band there. And then of course, as we start bonding channels, we start trying to make bigger channels to fit more data in them. We get more bandwidth from them, which will give us more speed, but then we get less channels in total. So you only have channel 3 here. We can't put another channel with a nice guard band, which is why most most 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi networks will be just using 1, 6, and 11. Now in the 5 gigahertz range, we have many more bands. Because the frequencies are higher, we have more, they allocate more frequencies in the bands. So we could fit, you see, so many more individual bands here. If we stuck with 20 megahertz bands, as we did here, so these are all 20 megahertz bands, the 20 megahertz channel width. If we stuck with 20 megahertz here, we would get so many more bands that we could use. And because of this, because we don't need so many bands to use, we could start doubling up safely. So we could use 40 megahertz, 80 megahertz, even 160 megahertz. And we could fit so much more bandwidth in here because of all of this extra frequency. So you see, in the 2.4 gigahertz range, we could only go up to 40 megahertz in the worst case. Like this is fairly terrible, because as soon as we get interference here, that's it. Our one channel band is dead. Here we could go all the way up to 160 megahertz, and we could still fit 2. We could still move here. And of course, we mentioned DFS, or dynamic frequency shifting. I think that was the name for it. So basically, we said these bands, although they are allocated for Wi-Fi, they need to move. So they see weather radar here. So if any of the old equipment, if any of the weather equipment or satellite equipment starts transmitting here, your Wi-Fi equipment knows that it needs to shift bands immediately and let the other more important equipment use that frequency range. Now, once we had covered the basic wireless principles, we went on to describe 2 important terms related to WLANs or Wi-Fi networks: SSIDs and encryption types. Do you remember what an SSID is? So the service set identifier, which is basically, as I said, your Wi-Fi name. So that's the thing you see when you when you click Wi-Fi on your Windows taskbar. Those are the names you see coming up there, and it just identifies, your wireless network to the world. So that's the name per your network. And then of course is the other thing you need to know for Wi-Fi, as you will know from connecting to Wi-Fi networks for the past 2 years. Besides the Wi-Fi name, you also need to get the password. So with each SSID, there are a particular set of security protocols associated with it, unless it's open, of course, which we never recommend. But the security protocols are called WEP, WPA, and WPA2. So this was the wireless security cheat sheet that I got for you. So we started off with WEP. It was the first 802.11 security standard. So basically the first set of security protocols available for Wi-Fi networks, but it was easily broken due to the weak initialization vector and the weak authentication. So you should never use it, basically. WPA came out, I think it was 1 year after, and it was just supposed to be an interim standard. Because they saw how weak WEP was, they just pushed out WPA very quickly to address the major security flaws of WEP. It adds longer initialization vectors, larger keys, and it introduced TKIP, Temporal Key Integrity Protocol. So you should only use this if WPA2 is not available. So WPA2, as of now, is the current standard. Newer hardware ensures advanced encryption doesn't affect performance. It has a personal and an enterprise mode. The personal mode, the PSK mode, is what we use day to day. So we double click on the Wi-Fi network, we put in a password, and once our password is correct, we get into the network. In enterprise mode, for various reasons, we use different methods of authenticating to the network. So a lot of places will use certificates. So if you have a device, they will install a certificate on it, and that device will just present the certificate as a way of authenticating to the network and saying, look, I have a certificate, I should be authorized to this network. Some other places will have usernames and passwords. So rather than having a shared password between everyone in the enterprise, they will have a username, and each user will have their own password. So different places will do it in different ways. And of course, the enterprise mode, because it is using these more advanced methods, it is it gives you a stronger authentication method. And of course, WPA2 brought about CCNP and AES, which were the 2 more advanced protocols that improve security with this version. And this version is the recommended version nowadays, until WPA3 becomes mainstream. So now we'll move on to some new material for this week. So we're going to discuss something called virtualization now. We're not going to configure anything because Cisco just asked us to understand the concepts of it. And if you do any sort of sysadmin work or Linux work, you'll be very familiar with virtualization, or you'll have to become very familiar with virtualization. But for the CCNA realm, we just need to understand the basics. So to understand the concept of virtualization, we first have to begin with a server. So a server is simply a host machine. Think of it just like you would your laptop or desktop computer. So when you hear server, just think of a computer. It's some type of computer. So the main differences are really in the performance of the server. It's usually much more powerful than a laptop. And of course, its form factor is also different. It's made to be mounted on a data center rack. So a rack of servers in a data center typically looks something like this. So you can see here, these are the racks. If you ever worked in a data center, or if you ever walk into a data center, you'll see racks like this. It kind of looks like a metal cage or a metal cupboard. And the width of the racks and usually the height as well is made to a particular standard. So equipment made to the same standard could just slide into the rack, and it can mount your equipment in a very space efficient manner. So you could put all the equipment like here and mount it front to back, as opposed to stacking towers or doing some other madness. So this is a very efficient way to put in a bunch of computing power into a small space. And the equipment is cooled from front to back or from back to front, depending on the equipment. So you'll pull in cold air here and push out the hot air at the back, or vice versa. So these things here are hard drive carriers. So if you ever saw a hard drive, that kind of metal shaped, a kind of metal rectangular or square thing, it is in one of these cages, and these things are made to be easily removable. So if a hard drive fails, you just pull out the clip, unscrew the hard drive, and then screw in a new one and push it back in. And these ones that don't have the kind of cards you see in here, these will usually have the compute power. So these will have RAM sticks and CPU sockets in them. So usually you just slide them out like a drawer, and then you pull out the top of them, and you could put in more RAM or take out bad memory sticks or swap the power supply or do any maintenance just like you would on a normal PC. Yeah, so a server is just a more powerful PC. So the inside of a single server looks like below. It has the same components, RAM, CPU, hard disk drive, as a regular PC. So as I mentioned, you just slide it out like a drawer. And these are all things you would find in a normal PC. They just kind of scaled up. So you see these things here are fans. These are power supply units. You'll see the RAM sticks there, the RAM sockets. This would be the CPU sockets here somewhere, and the heatsink on top of it. And yeah, all these things are made to be very easily swappable. So you just pull out the drawer, and you could pull out a fan, or you could pull out a RAM stick and put in a new one, and keep your server running. And usually, okay, you can see here, this is a hard drive caddy. So you'd put your hard drive in here and screw it in, and then slide it into like a cage like this. And usually you would have these things monitored. So the instant a fan or a RAM stick fails, you get a notification, and then you could come up and pull out the drawer here and replace that component immediately. Now, once upon a time, enterprises would simply buy as many of these bare metal or dedicated or physical servers as they needed to run their applications or services. So for example, if an enterprise needed a DNS server, they would purchase a server for that. If they then needed an FTP server, they would purchase another server for that. So basically, once upon a time, you would have one of these things running every single application or every single service you needed in your enterprise or in your business. So if you needed, if you wanted to host a website, you would buy a whole server and you would host a website on that server. If you wanted to set up your own DNS server, you would buy a whole server and set up DNS on that server. However, we later found that it was much more efficient to make these servers virtual. So virtual servers or virtual machines could make much more efficient use of the tons of RAM or CPU or storage that each physical server could provide. So basically what we're saying is, instead of buying one of these big machines to run a small service like a DNS service, we could split it up. We buy this big machine and we could share it among different services. Yeah, so that's what a virtual machine is. So these virtual servers were created through the use of a special application called a hypervisor. With these hypervisors, we could run multiple virtual servers on a single physical host machine. Right. With these hypervisors, we could run multiple virtual servers on a single physical host machine, and each virtual server could run its own operating system, OS, and its own set of applications. Common hypervisors include Proxmox, Hyper-V, VMware, and KVM. You'll see hypervisors like a bunch of different hypervisor names thrown around now. These are just some examples I came across. And I know, okay, if I had to guess here, I would say VMware has the biggest share of the market right now. Windows Hyper-V is fairly well known. Linux KVM is fairly well known as well. Proxmox is not as well known, but it is free. So you could check out Proxmox if you want to try it. VMware also has a few free versions, I believe. But just to expand on the concepts of hypervisors now. 1 second. Right. Yeah. So this is what we're talking about, right? So we have this underlying hardware here. So think about this as one of those servers we just saw. So one of those drawers. So before we just had one piece of hardware and we would run one application on that piece of hardware. Now we're saying we're installing this special application or this special piece of software called a hypervisor. And what this hypervisor lets us do is it lets us run multiple stacks of these things on the same physical server. Yeah. So just as an example, we could call this VM1, VM2, VM3, and we could install a Linux OS on this VM1. We could do a Windows OS on VM2 and a Mac OS on VM3. And maybe we could run a Windows specific application on this one, a Linux specific application on this one, and a Mac specific application on this one, all using the same physical server. So you can see how this helps us with saving space and storage and heat and everything, right? So as you can see, the resources of the physical server are shared between the virtual servers that we create. So the technical word is spin up. So if you want to start a new VM, if you want to create a new VM on a server, they call it spinning up a VM. Now this sharing of the resources is fine because most of the time our servers don't utilize all of the resources that we assign to them. So for example, DNS servers utilize very little RAM and CPU. So you'll see some servers are very lightweight and we can afford to share them, well, share the hardware resources between them. So because of this, virtualization helps us to make much more efficient use of our server resources in the data center. Of course, we still want to retain the network connectivity that each dedicated server had. We therefore utilize virtual network interface cards or VNICs to connect each VM to the network. Each VNIC connects to a virtual switch or vSwitch, which is then bound to the physical NIC on our physical server. So this is what we're talking about. Our VMs are fine running on their hypervisor, but we also want a way to communicate with those VMs, right? We want to give them internet access, so we want to give them network access. So each VM has a VNIC, so a virtual network interface card. Remember I said the network interface card is how your machine interacts with the network or how it connects to the network. So rather than having a physical network interface card, they have a virtual network interface card. So each of them will have a VNIC and they will connect to a virtual switch, which will be inside the hypervisor as well. So it will be as if you had a connection from the switch to each of these VMs, or as if you had a connection to each of these servers, because they are like servers by themselves now. And then all of those VNICs share the physical NIC out of the server. So the server will have one or a few physical network ports that it will use to connect to a physical switch, and then that physical port is shared using a virtual switch inside the hypervisor to share and get network connectivity to all of these VMs. Yeah, so that these things can get network access. So virtualization has been expanded in recent years, and if you know about a physical appliance that does a particular function, chances are good that it has a virtual counterpart. They are virtual servers, switches, routers, firewalls, IPSs, everything. So everything that you know is physical, if you know there's a physical router or a firewall or something from some vendor, chances are there's a virtual version of that on sale right now. So virtualization has become integral to almost every branch of IT. So you should spend some time and explore how virtualization can impact your day-to-day work. So if you work in anything IT related right now, and you work on some physical appliance, do some research and find out if there's a virtual version of that appliance available. Because chances are there is a virtual version available, and it does a lot of the same functions as the physical appliance. Which is why it might make sense when you're upgrading or when the physical appliance dies, it might make sense to just get a server and run a virtual version of the appliance instead of buying a next physical box. Right, so all Cisco asks us to do, by the way, is explore virtualization concepts. So all of this will be very theoretical for now, and hopefully in another course you could actually start playing with something in VMware. Actually in the bonus course we will start off with a bit of that. You'll see a bit of this virtualization being used. But for now we're just going to explore the concepts, and we're going to move on to switching concepts. So now that you understand a bit about virtualization, let's switch to something a bit more network oriented. So switching. Switching simply refers to the process by which network switches move data in the form of frames in and out of their interfaces. So we discussed this before, right? When you hear the word switching, think about layer 2, think about switches, and think about frames. Now before there were switches, there were hubs. So hubs worked at layer 1, forwarding frames out all ports except the ones they were received on. So they basically broadcasted every frame they got back out every single port except the port that the frame was received on. Now switches were introduced after hubs to improve this process by examining Ethernet frame headers to make more intelligent forwarding decisions. So hubs didn't examine anything, right? Hubs just took in a frame and blasted it out every single other port that it had. So switches were introduced to bring more intelligence to this process. You may also hear folks mention bridges here and there. So bridges can be regarded as the precursor to switches. So when you hear a bridge and a switch, just think it's the same thing. But really the difference is bridges have fewer ports and they were more software dependent than switches. So switches use these things called ASICs, which are ASICs are application specific integrated circuits. Think of it as like a little microchip that can do something, but it can do that one thing very quickly. So if you tell it add 1 plus 1, a switch could add 1 plus 1 very quickly. It's like, hey, 1 plus 1, 2, 1 plus 1, 2, 1 plus 1, 2, one time. If you ask it 1 plus 3, it doesn't know. It doesn't know how to do 1 plus 3 because it only has the programming for ASICs, for that ASIC, 1 plus 1. But because it only has that, it can do it very quickly. Bridges can do stuff much more slowly, but they are software dependent, so they were more flexible. But we really needed that speed in layer 2, which is why we hear about switches way more than bridges now. So this is the Ethernet frame format. So these are the fields in the header of an Ethernet frame. So Ethernet frames can be 64 to 18 bytes, and these are how the information is split up in the frame. So you have a preamble, you have a starting delimiter, SD, you have the destination MAC address, you have the MAC source address, you have the type of data in the above layers, then you have the information in the above layers, then you have some padding, and you have a FCS, or frame check sequence. They have some more information here about the types. So 0x, anything starting with 0x, by the way, is hex. So we know what hexadecimal digits are now. So when you see something starting with 0x, it means it's a hexadecimal digit or a hexadecimal number that's going to follow. So you see the D there, so the hexadecimal number they represent in here, which is what the 0x represents. So this will make a lot more sense when you open up Wireshark. So you just sniff some traffic and open up the layer 2 information or the Ethernet information in Wireshark, and you'll see Wireshark break down your actual frames into these headers. And you'll see MAC destination address, and you'll see a bit of information there representing the actual MAC address, and so on and so on. And for the type, you'll see something like this, which means this Ethernet frame is carrying IPv4 information or IPv6 information, depending on what's in that type. Yeah, so these are just like a table in each frame that goes out at layer 2, and things like Wireshark and your applications could use this table and break down the data in the frame, and it can make sense of it using these headers. So devices at layer 2 are identified by addresses called MAC addresses. It's also called hardware addresses or simply layer 2 addresses. Unlike IP addresses, which are managed and assigned by network engineers like us, so we manage IP addresses. On the other hand, MAC addresses are usually hard-coded into equipment during manufacturing. So usually, you can change a MAC address or spoof a MAC address using software, but usually the MAC address is hard-coded into equipment. So we usually don't have like a pool of of MAC addresses. We usually just use the MAC addresses that is hard-coded into the equipment. Now switches, unlike the hubs before them, take advantage of these hard-coded MAC addresses to make more intelligent forwarding decisions. They learn MAC addresses by examining the source MAC address of incoming frames and adding these source addresses to their MAC address tables. So important note there, they examine the source MAC address of the frames. You'll see the process in a few slides down the road. It's now, right, okay, 40 minutes. So later, they then examine this table to only forward frames to these specific devices instead of broadcasting them to all devices. Remember we said that hubs broadcast frames to all the other devices on the network. Switches don't do that. They build a special MAC address table and they use that to do intelligent forwarding. So let's examine this process of building that table. So consider, as an example, that we have 3 devices that have just connected to our switch. So this switch rebooted or we just connected these devices fresh. So they haven't begun forwarding frames yet. The MAC address table on the switch is empty. So you see this layer 2 switch here. This is a layer 2 switch, so it only uses MAC addresses, nothing about IP addresses. And this is a theoretical representation of the MAC address table here. So the switch just booted or we just connected these devices, so the table is empty. Yeah, so see nothing in the table yet. So device A now wishes to send a frame to device B. The frame is coded with the source address or SA and destination address as shown and sent to the switch. So you see this this PC here, he's device A, this is his MAC address which is hard coded into his NIC, and he knows the MAC address of B. But this switch doesn't know it yet because this is his MAC address table. He doesn't know anything yet. So this is our source address, this is our destination address. Remember the Ethernet header we just described a few slides ago? That would be the source address there, that would be the MAC address there. We're ignoring the other headers for now. So we just examining the source address and the destination address because that's all the switch cares about. So you see this frame now is going to come into this switch port on FA11. When the switch receives the frame, so it received the frame on the line from PCA, it examines the source address and adds that to its MAC address table since it does not already have it. It then floods or broadcasts this frame out all of its ports except the one that the frame was received on, since it has no entry for the destination address. So you see the steps there, right? The frame here, this frame here with a source address of all A's came in here. The switch saw that frame coming on this port interface FA11 and it saw the source address was all A's. So it said, hey, I didn't have this address before, let me learn this address and let me put it in with this port, because I saw this guy with this MAC address here send a frame through this port, so he must therefore be connected here because he's going to send frames with his source address attached to it, right? You see his MAC address was all A's, the source address of his frame was all A's. Therefore the switch knows that his MAC address is all A's by examining the source address. So he's going to say, I have something connected here and I don't know anything yet, but because I saw this source address come in here with all A's, I could tell that FA11 is connected to this guy, which is all A's. Yeah, so he now knows that A is connected here. But on the tail end of that, on the other end of that, he watches the destination address and he's going to say, hey, I need to send this to the guy with all B's. But this is my MAC address table. I don't know anybody with all B's. So I need to broadcast this out. So he's going to send it out. The other two ports, he wouldn't send it back on the port that it was received on. He's going to send it out the other two ports, which is flooding. And he's going to say, look, I don't know where this guy is connected. This OLB's guy, I don't know where he connected. So I'm just going to flood it out and hope that it reaches him, because I don't know where that guy is. All I know is that on FA11, this A guy is connected there because he sent a frame and I saw that source address on there. Yeah? So that's the two things that happened there. Frame came in, switch added the source address to its MAC address table with the port, and then the switch broadcasted this frame out the other two ports to try and get that OLB's guy, because the switch didn't know where OLB's guy was because he doesn't have an entry in his MAC address table. Now you see the frame going out here, right? It going out to B, it going out to C, because that's where the switch sent it to. So host C simply drops the frame. So host C will get that frame as well, but he's just going to discard that frame, since he is going to examine. So he's going to examine the destination address of that frame, and he's going to see that his MAC address was all C's, whereas this is all B's. So he's going to say that's not a match, obviously, so he's going to drop it. So he doesn't have a MAC that matches the destination address. Host B, on the other hand, actually processes the frame because he does have a MAC address that matches that destination MAC address. So he processes the frame and creates a response for host A, sending the following frame back to the switch. So whatever data was contained in that frame, we don't know, and we don't really care at layer 2. All we care about is that that MAC address matched B's MAC address. So he processes that frame and then he formulates a response, and that response is going to be a reply. So he's going to reply to host A now. So you see now the addresses are flipped. So the source address now is B and the destination is A. So B is going to reply back to A. So let's see what happens here. So this frame now is reply from B, and B sends it back and it's going to come in to the switch now. Remember, so far all the switch knows is this MAC address from this port, because that's the only frame it saw so far. So let's see what happens now. So the switch now sees the source address for host B and adds it to its MAC address table. So this frame came in, it has a source address of all B's on this port, FA12. So the switch says, hey, I didn't have the entry before, let me add it in one time. So that's the first half of it. The switch watches the source address, again, the source address first. Watches the source address, says it didn't have it, so you see it had no entries here. It didn't have it in the table, and it watches that source address and say, hey, I want to add that. I didn't know that guy was there, let me add it first. So he adds that MAC address to his table with the port. So he says, hey, I saw a frame coming from this guy, therefore this guy, this OLB's guy, is clearly connected to this port. So that's what this entry says. And on the tail end of this now, the second half, he's going to look at the destination address. So he says, look, I need to send this frame to all A's, but I checked my table and I actually have an entry for all A's. So I could now unicast this out and send this out only to this port, which is FA11. Send it out there, because I'm pretty sure this guy is connected here, because he sent a frame and I saw the source address was there before. Yeah? So this time, the switch knows the destination address of the frame. So it unicasts this out, just unicasts, it doesn't send it out to C again. It unicasts out to port FA11 only instead of broadcasting it. So now the switch knows how to reach all A's and all B's, and any information, well, any transmissions going between A and B could now be unicasted. It doesn't need to be broadcasted anymore, because the switch knows both of those guys. He knows where to reach them, and doesn't need to just blindly broadcast it out. Now eventually a frame comes along destined for host C, and the same process is repeated. The frame is initially broadcasted out to other ports. So just in this case, we saw B sent a frame to C, so it came from B and it was sent to C. The switch would see this and say, hey, I don't know where C is, I need to broadcast this out. I don't have an entry for C, so I need to send this out every other port except the port that I received this on. But in this case, he won't add an entry for B, because he already has that entry for B. So he'll just refresh the entry and say, look, I already know where this B is, but clearly he's still connected there because he's still transmitting, so I'll just refresh his entry. So it's there already. But for the C guy, I don't know where C is. My table doesn't have a matching entry for C. So I'm therefore going to broadcast it out to all these other ports. Once host C replies to a frame, the switch learns the MAC address for it too. The switch now has the addresses for all hosts connected to its ports, allowing it to efficiently switch future frames across its ports without having to broadcast unnecessarily. So now this process can be done in those special ASIC chips I mentioned, which is when the switch could operate at its most efficient. Switches could forward frames in and out of their ports, matching these MAC address tables very quickly. That is what those ASIC chips are very good at. Just bringing in a frame, looking at this MAC address table, and forwarding out another frame very quickly. So you see, like in this, so source address is C, destination address is B, and the MAC address table of this switch has entries for all of those things. So the frame will come in, he'll say, hey, you being sent from C, okay, I already have an entry for you, I'm just going to refresh you, and then you're going to B, okay, I have an entry for B, send it out there, one time, very quickly. ASICs are very efficient at that. So using this efficient process of switching, as well as these specially developed ASICs, which are application-specific integrated circuits, modern switches can forward frames at line speed, meaning that this process can occur at rates of 1, 10, 100, even 400 gigabits per second, so super fast. Now note that broadcasting still happens in switches even after all source addresses are learned, as some protocols use like the special broadcast MAC address. So if you look through a big Wireshark trace and you look at the layer 2 headers, you will notice that the destination address, so this destination address there, in some of the protocols will always be all Fs, which is the broadcast address at layer 2, because those protocols just need to utilize broadcasts at layer 2. Now also note that MAC addresses do not stay stored in the table indefinitely. Most switches have an aging timer automatically configured, which deletes the source address, which is this row here. So it deletes that row from the table if it doesn't see any frames from the source for the configured time. This helps to keep the MAC address table small. Your 2960 switch in Packet Tracer can hold only 8,000 MAC addresses in its memory. So it could only have 8,000 rows mapping MAC addresses to ports. So that might seem like a lot, but when you start building bigger and bigger networks, you'll see that you could have problems with this table just getting too big. So to keep that table maintainable, and to make sure that the table doesn't become full, these switches have aging timers built into them. So basically, if A sends a frame, and then for 2 weeks A doesn't send a frame anymore, or for whatever time we configure, the switch doesn't see anything from A, it's going to delete that entry. And then when A sends something again, or when something sends something for A, that whole process of relearning this entry would have to reoccur. But that is necessary to keep that table maintainable. Now the command for viewing this MAC address table in a Cisco switch is show MAC address table. So I have seen this command a little tweaked in different Cisco devices. So if you drag across some random switches and it not work, this exact command not working, play around with the command a little bit. So put show MAC and then space and then question mark, and see what comes up. I have seen it without this hyphen and then some show MAC and then hyphen address and table. Different switches have it a little different, but in my switch this is what the command showed up as. So you can see these are the entries here. So we'll discuss VLANs in the next class, but for now you can see the MAC address and the port. The type means you could statically put a MAC address, so you could say, look, I don't want you forgetting this MAC address ever. I want to put you statically in the table and I want you to always stay in the table. So these 4 static ones on top, those are MAC addresses that the switch itself has. So obviously the switch doesn't want to ever forget its own MAC addresses, which is why these ports will be CPU here. So those are MAC addresses kind of inside the switch, and these other dynamic ones here are learns from outside the switch from different ports, and you can see those different ports here. So that's it for today. So go and try the lab. 1 second, close. Right, try lab 8, was it? Yeah, lab 8, You should be able to do it because, as I said, the lab should have good instructions. Let me know if you can't get through with it. And in the next class, we will go on to VLANs. So in this class, we discussed the fundamentals of virtualization, and we went through those switching concepts. So you now know what MAC learning is, you know why we need MAC aging, you know when we could do switching and when we could do flooding, and what's the difference between them, and you know what a MAC address table is and the command to show it. And Cisco does like to test this a lot. Usually they'll give you a little situation, a quick situation, and say, look, this is the MAC address table of the switch, this is the frame that's coming in on this port, and A, B, C, or D, describe the next step that's going to happen. So either the frame is going to be flooded out all the ports, the frame is going to be flooded out all the ports except the port it was received on, the frame is going to be unicast out port A, the frame is going to be unicasted out port B. So make sure you understand that whole concept we just went over. So go through the tables and the slides by yourself, and make sure you could kind of predict what's the next step that's going to happen. Okay, so have a good good rest of the week, and I will see you all Tuesday.